Now then, folks, there's a lot of football about, isn't there? We're recording this probably just before Scunthorpe's promotion parade. There's all sorts of things going on to celebrate Doncaster Rovers. And then, just for me, got to mention that Crystal Palace did win our first meaningful trophy in nearly 120 years last Saturday. So isn't that absolutely fantastic? Other sports are available. But talking of success, I want to just run through a few, I'll call them operational doings, things that we have to do as an NHS organisation that people have been busy getting on with, but sometimes in the excitement and the promotion of new, novel ideas, those things perhaps don't get the emphasis that they truly merit. So for the first time in the organisation's history, in April, the Trust as a whole, all services, including mental health services, met the referral to treatment target of the NHS, sometimes known as the 18-week target, sometimes known as the RTT target. Now, what that means is at least two things have happened successfully. The first is we've been really diligent about the administration of who is on our waiting list, how long they've waited, making sure we've made an offer to look after them in line with the access policy that we agreed last year. But it also means that teams have worked really hard to create the capacity, the appointments, to see sufficient patients in a given period. And you know, particularly if you work in memory services, perhaps some of the journey of work that's been needed to get to that point. So thank you so much. I'm sure there's hard work on that ahead, but it just needs to be acknowledged. And obviously, we're working hard, aren't we, to sustain it. Then, as I think I might have mentioned in the vlog before, we've worked through our process for signing off budgets. And that isn't simply a matter of trying to get two numbers to add up and balance to zero. It's importantly a matter of working through the QSIA indicators and process that we created to make sure that the risk that's created by any form of change is understood and is watchfully managed going forward. So effectively, we've created a system of red flag indicators where a change is made, and we're going to keep an eye on a particular measure to see if that change has had either unintended consequences or disproportionately negative effects. All of our directorates have now got to a point where we've been able to sign off budgets. And in the majority of cases, colleagues, the money available will be, on paper at least, more than it was last year. And that's because we've done well in stewarding our finances and because we've been able to make the investments that we've spoken about in these vlogs before. Perhaps the more critical change, though, with those budgets is this. We're now trying to manage all of our clinical services at a directorate level. Now, even though directorates are smaller than care groups, they're a hell of a lot bigger than teams or individual services. And so the conversations I've been having with some of our service manager colleagues in particular is what opportunities that creates. So maybe in one particular team, there's a pressure point or a stress. In another particular team, it's difficult to recruit. And the idea of managing at that directorate level, they're typically about 10, 15 million pound business units, is that will create some flexibility to look across and between teams. So I'm sure service managers would explain it better than me, but it's something to pay attention to because I think it's quite important as we move through as an organisation over the next couple of years. And then we've talked about getting radar up and running. There's the usual teething troubles, particularly in relation to multi-factor authentication. But what's really important is that we don't lose sight of all the information about patient care that was held on the prior Ulysses system. And particularly that means that the 300 or so remaining incidents that have been reported under that old system still need to be paid attention to be learnt from, and to be closed down. I'm looking forward to seeing reporting coming out of Radar to give us a sense, looking across the organisation, of many important indicators in terms of patient safety. And good news that from the 1st of July, our risk registers will go on to radar as well. We were looking at the clinical leadership executive this week at how risk registers are working in the organisation. I think a really encouraging sense is that risks are getting closed down, new risks are getting opened up. But it's certainly the case that in an individual directorate, you'll want to be looking to make sure that the genuine risks that exist in any healthcare organisation are well represented on your risk register. Now, looking ahead, I'm excited that as part of Promise 10, as part of working on what's called Inclusion Health, we will be bringing experts together both locally and from national organisations in the middle of June to look at the support we're able to provide, particularly to people experiencing homelessness. We made financial provision to make progress in this area, and I'm optimistic that by the time we get to the autumn, we will have probably a new team up and running in that space. Now, obviously, it's really important when we're looking to create specialist services that we also make sure that our mainstream services are very, very accessible to patients that we work with. I always tell this story, but many years ago when I worked in hostels for people who are experiencing homelessness, there was a really discriminating variable with health services about whether they would allow the clients that we worked with to bring their dog into the consultation. And you can imagine if you're sleeping homeless on the street tonight, you have perhaps very few possessions, but some that keep you safe and make you feel a little bit more valued in yourself. So there's lots more we could do to make our services accessible, but I would urge us, even as we're developing those specialist services with the Pathway organisation, to have a think about whether we have unnecessary barriers to access or care in our system. You'll see lots of publicity at the moment for the work that has started in Burns Court in Rotherham, where we've taken residential tenancies potentially for some clients in order to make sure that people have the right kind of accommodation during a process of recovery. I would imagine that in North Links and in Doncaster, we will be doing something similar over the next 18 months. There's a lot more to Promise 10. I could talk about work with refugees, I could talk about the work that Susanna Parker is doing with sex worker representative organisations. But it's important that we do focus now on the most excluded populations in our society. And at a time of benefit cuts and other societal challenges, probably even more important that we have that focus. Now, just before I remind you about the AMM, which is on July the 19th, let me remind you about a couple of things that are happening in June. So the week beginning June the 9th, we have Carers Week. And there's quite a bit of publicity, particularly led by our amazing carers network that's emerging, giving such voice to important issues across our organisation and in our community. So do look out for details of how you might be able to get involved in that. And then, of course, the following week, the 16th, we have Learning Disabilities Week. We've invested in our learning disabilities team a lot over the last couple of years. The particular focus this year is younger adults, or older teenagers, and their transition into adulthood and the health checks that we might be able to provide and health support we might be able to provide for those folk. Of course, Carleen Holden and her team are also working on an employment programme for people who have a learning disability. So there's a lot going on, as ever. I started with the operational detail. I'm also celebrating some of these bigger extra things that we're putting in place. Finding the right balance of emphasis between those two things is so important. Look out too for publicity in June, because as an exec group, the chairman and myself will be out and about doing some listening activities, giving you the chance to have your say and also to listen to us and ask questions about the things this organisation is up to. Stay safe and stay well over the bank holiday. Cheers.